Hello, everyone. By the time you see this, I will probably be on my way to Hawaii for Pro Tour Kaladesh. This is one of the decks I was working on. I still think it's pretty good, but ultimately probably not what I'm going to play. Haven't exactly decided yet, but we'll likely have Scrap Heap Scrounger and Smuggler's Copter. So I played with the various white-red decks, and I liked the draws that had more one-drops, so I wanted a way to get more one-drops. I didn't necessarily like the mana base, but I did like Scrap Heap Scrounger. There were some white-red decks that were just splashing that off of Aether Hub and Concealed Courtyard, and that looked pretty sweet, but again, the mana was not great. So, always watching out of their sideboards always impressed me. It always looked very, very good in the mirror, except for the fact that a lot of the decks, like White-Red Humans, are actually just like token-based, so I didn't want to be token-based either. So that's kind of how we got here. I was just looking at basically mono-white and seeing if there were enough things to like fill slots on the curve, and obviously there were little white creatures, you know, like I'm not sure why I even doubted that that might be the case, but the one that I really want to play with was Fairgrounds Warden. And this is kind of like a Reflector Mage, except if they don't have a removal spell for it, then they kind of just lose, because you just get to like FTK their best creature, and in the meantime, while they try and find that removal spell, you keep it locked down, and this is a deck where they definitely want to use removal spells on your early creatures. You also have Selfless Spirit to protect the Fairgrounds Warden, so I like that a lot. And yeah, I don't know, just like 2/4 bodies, pretty good with Always Watching. The vehicles are pretty nice with Always Watching. Obviously, Smuggler's Copter is really nice, allowing you to sift through your draws, and Scrap Heap Scrounger gives you a little bit of just like play going into the mid and late game, you know, like it allows you to be a little bit more resilient against removal-based decks. And the 12 1-drops are pretty nice. Thraben's Inspector makes an artifact for Toolcraft Exemplar, so we end up with like 12 early artifacts, basically, which is kind of on the low end, but I still think it's pretty good, just because like 1 mana 1/1 is honestly not that bad, but once you start getting an artifact to pump it, then it becomes great. I've always liked Town Gossipmonger, possibly a little bit too much, but Gossipmonger Always Watching is a hell of a combo. I'm not sure if Gossipmonger Smuggler's Copter is really a combo or not, because you play turn 1 Gossipmonger, turn 2 Copter, and you don't have a thing to transform your Gossipmonger with, but the vehicles in the mid to late game, like if you flip into Incited Rabble, the vehicles give you a way to actually just tap it so that it doesn't have to get suicided into their big creature, so that's actually kind of cool. So, some nombos and some combos, basically. We have Fleet Wheel Cruiser on the top end. It's an artifact, it has haste, it's really big, tramples. This could be Gideon, but again, artifact synergy with Exemplar I think is pretty important, and for the main deck, I just want to be like as fast and resilient as possible, and I think Cruiser helps you accomplish that more than Gideon does by a slight margin. Mana base is 22 lands, a lot of plains, 4 Courtyards, which is the best land by far, a couple Shambling Vents, which likely won't get activated very often, but are another black source that also taps for white. So you could play something like Aether Hub, but since a lot of your turns are going to be like, you know, play 1-drop, play 1-drop, or like play 1-drop, play 2-drop, like you aren't really going to want to spend the energy on Aether Hub to do that, because then you have this colorless land that doesn't necessarily cast any of your spells anyway, and if you have to spend the energy to cast white 1-drop, then you don't have the black mana to cast to return Scrap Heap Scrounger anyway, so I don't feel like Aether Hub really fixes the mana so much as just like demolishes the mana. And Swamp kind of has the same problem. I do feel like we could play a Swamp, and yeah, let's do that. Let's try 1 Swamp, because I feel like if you draw 1 Swamp, it's probably fine. The only times where it's going to hinder you are when you have a triple 1-drop draw and you have plain Swamp, but like if you have triple 1-drop and you have plain Shambling Vents, then your draw is not super great anyway. I mean, you can play turn 1 Gossipmonger, turn 2 Transform it, and that's obviously fine, but the Swamp shouldn't be too bad. So yeah, I think I like a Swamp, so good thing we haven't joined our league yet. But that's about it for the main deck. Just Declaration in Stone and Fairgrounds Warden for removal, so you have 8, which is kind of on par with what everyone else is doing, but it might seem low to only have Stone, but the Warden counts. So sideboard in mono white is like actually surprisingly good. I think Avacyn is very, very good in these white aggressive mirrors, because no one ever plays around it. It is kind of awkward where once you have Avacyn in play, then they can kill one of your creatures, force the transform, and then it'll wipe the rest of your board, but so far that hasn't really been an issue. I mean, if they're killing your smaller creature to make your Avacyn transform, then you're like dealing them 3 and then possibly an additional 6, and you already Avacyn them, so I assume you're just going to be in a fine spot from there anyway. Gideons, which are just more big threats for mid-range and control decks. I think this is a pretty easy one. If I'm on the play, I might bring this in against other aggressive decks too, both because the emblem is very good and just like pumping out a jump blocker is nice too. A couple Stasis Snares. I want some additional removal. I want removal that hits Avacyn, Torrential Gearhulk, maybe even Metalwork Colossus, things like that. And I think Snare, since it exiles, is a little bit better, even though people might bring in things like Fragmentize against you, just because it actually gets rid of Haunted Dead or Prized Amalgam. Whereas with Sky Whaler's Shot, you know, like their Amalgam will just come back, and you can't necessarily hit everything you want to, so Stasis Snare is pretty nice. I have not tried Tandem Tactics yet, but I wanted to for the mirror matches, so that's what this video is for. Just get a little experience here. I feel like there's a lot of attacking and blocking on the ground, potentially in the air in Smuggler's Copter Wars, and Tactics seems like it could be a potential blowout, plus the gain 2 life is a nice little value add. We have 2 Fragmentize, which I think is the amount that I want for the mirror. I tried with 3 and it just felt too heavy, so 2 seems like a reasonable number that you can board in. And then I have 4 Blessed Alliance, which is a lot. But there's this red-green energy electrostatic pummeler, like double strike deck that is actually pretty good and happens to be pretty good against decks like this. So we have 4 alliances. It might seem like a lot. One could potentially be a Repel the Abominable, which would double as hate against Kozilek's Return, which is pretty nice. But I don't know. I feel like just having 4 alliances makes it so hard for them to actually beat you. And the gain life is relevant if you play against something like black-red aggro, or red-black aggro, whatever. And yeah, I just feel like Alliance is a pretty good card. It's not a card that I want to bring in mirror matches or anything. And now I'm wondering if like the other collective card is any good, the white collective card. But we're not gonna go that deep. This is my 60, so this is what we're gonna play with. Gonna hop in a competitive standard league and see how it goes.